Greetings. This is Developmental Psychology, and today we're talking about the middle school age from 6 to 12. And to start with, let's talk about some of the changes that are experienced in body growth by the average kiddo entering and moving through this life stage. So changes in general are slower and steadier than they were in previous stages, but they do gain 2 to 3 inches in height. Their body weight does double, and girls are slightly shorter than boys from 6 to 8, and then the trend begins to shift in the opposite direction. Girls do develop an additional body fat layer with puberty, which may come as early these days as 10, 11, 12, certainly by 12, 13, and lower portion of body growth increases. So this is noticeable, and in addition, all 20 primary teeth, which are called deciduous teeth, are replaced by permanent teeth. Okay, so one of the things that we know is that because the brain is still developing, but really increasing its ability to send and receive messages to the muscles of the upper and lower extremities in greater efficiencies, then what we see is that things like running and jumping and hopping and the ball skills you see kiddos involved with is more refined and precise. So in addition, fine motor skills improve, and you'll see the drawings that children make grow in terms of their organization and detail, and in terms of representing 3 dimensions. Now, when kiddos play games, the rules become more complex, and the kids have a better concept of fairness and justice. And what we hope happens, but unfortunately doesn't, high-quality PE classes can be very important. They build self-esteem and they increase physical activity, and what should be happening is that kids learn about all different kinds of sports, many of which they can play for the rest of their lives, which are physical activity oriented, but also are pleasurable and don't require ultimate strength or coordination to play and play well. So unfortunately is the word I use because in this day and age, when cost cuts are made to education systems at the national level and the state level, then what you see is that some of the first things to go are art and PE and those sorts of things. And that's unfortunate, very unfortunate. Okay, so in terms of health, middle childhood is a period of pretty robust health on average, and that's mainly due to hygiene, clean water, and sewage systems in this country anyway, which tend to be pretty efficient. Routine immunizations is number 2 on that list of things that are useful because they lower the incidence of life-threatening illnesses in this country. But 90% of all children contract at least one condition, but most everything else is short-term in terms of its longevity. Kids about 25% of the time have nearsightedness, and let's see, they have fewer ear infections because the eustachian tubes are longer and narrower, which don't permit infectious agents to enter the inner ear as easily. There is still malnutrition. 1 in 6 children approximately are hungry at night when they go to bed, which is amazing to me. That's more of a food distribution system than it is lack of food, quite frankly. So in those who are malnourished, malnourishment is not common, but it does occur. In malnourishment, the long-term effects are in growth problems. You need only look at the difference in stature and weight of North Koreans versus South Koreans to see that difference. But it can also affect in terms of test scores, lowering those and reducing motor coordination and increasing things like inattention and distractibility. There's a higher range of illnesses, not surprisingly, in the first 2 years of elementary school, first and second grade, because they're exposed to other children that are sick, and the immune system is still developing. So this is interesting to see. So adults sometimes get sicker, the teachers and parents and so forth, because the kids are carrying those infectious agents home with them when they return in the afternoon. Accidents claim more victims than disease in this age stage: motor vehicles, bike accidents, fires, burns, drownings, gun-related deaths, and so on. Asthma, though, is the most common cause of school absence, and the highest risk group are African American young men, boys, and in addition to this, we see low birth weight, we see kiddos with parents who smoked, and poverty as being the other risk factors for losing school. So I want to talk a little bit about obesity. Obesity is the abnormal accumulation of body fat, and we have different ways of measuring that and declaring that and specifying that. But if we just say that anything over say about 25% of body fat, 25% body fat for men, 30% for women, and morbid obesity or obesity in general greater than 40%. These abnormal accumulations of body fat relative to frame are associated with the incidence of other illnesses and even disability and death, ultimately. So up to 70%, we think, of obesity is not just overeating, but is also contributed to by genetics. There are hundreds of genes associated with obesity, but the rest is environmental, and environmental components of eating poorly and eating too much can ameliorate some of the genetic factors that create obesity. Now look, slightly overweight children that are still active don't have significant increases in health risks. I want to talk a little bit more about psychological risks for gaining weight. And one is, we've talked about lack of physical activity, uneven and unhealthy eating patterns, which include low-cost, high-fat foods, high-sugar foods. But family stress can also create accumulations of body fat, because food acts as a reward system. It's comforting to eat comfort foods. It's obesity, weight gain is generally a number of factors, including environment, including psychological issues, and so on. It's rarely caused, though, by a medical condition. Okay, so what are the secondary problems that can erupt as a result of weight gain over the long term? Okay, arthritis and knee and ankle and hip problems are one later on. Hernias, heartburn, adult onset asthma, gum disease, tooth decay, high cholesterol levels, gallstones, high blood pressure, menstrual problems, including amenorrhea, which is the absence of menstrual periods, decreased fertility, pregnancy complications, shortness of breath that can be bad in terms of its level of severity, sleep apnea and other sleep problems, creating a kind of a cycle of inactivity due to tiredness and the eating that you do, causing increased weight gain, skin disorders, and then emotional and social problems. What would be, can you think of, a reason for the rates of obesity and morbid obesity increasing in the 70s? So we had about a 4 to 6 or 7% rate of obesity, and that was all the way in the United States up until about around 1980, and then boom, it rose steadily all the way up until now, which is in excess of 20% of the population. If you guessed that the availability of fast foods, which are not nutritious and do nothing for you, not just not nutritional, but do nothing for you in terms of what you need to sustain body functions, you would be correct. Now, currently, the states with the lowest rates of obesity are Colorado at about 17%, and Montana at about 20%, and Vermont and New Hampshire around that same number, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, all about the same. But then you look at states like Louisiana, it's around 28%, Alabama 29%, and Mississippi at 30%. Here in Oklahoma, it's 25%. Well, if we can manage weight, what do we get from that in improvements? Well, we get greater peer involvement. That's a good thing. We get more positive emotions and less anxiety. We get more eagerness to explore the environment and socialize. More persistence in frustrating situations. They feel less self-conscious. They experience less bullying. All sorts of things that are good. Okay. Let's talk about bedwetting, and at nighttime that's called nocturnal enuresis. Most cases are simply a physical lack of maturation. So the muscular responses that inhibit urination, sometimes it's hormonal imbalance, that increase too much urine to accumulate, and then this is released during sleep. Some cases are the result of emotional disturbance. Some cases, but most are not. Some are the response to marital discord, physical or sexual abuse, prolonged emotional abuse. And I want you to know that the reason to think something might be stress-related would be if you discover that a kiddo did not previously bedwet and now does in the middle school years, okay? How do we treat this if it's physical? Well, there's a urine alarm, which is a kind of a metal plate that registers liquid on it, sets an alarm off. That doesn't work so well. Underwear that collects it so it doesn't actually wet the bed itself. Medications to change certain balances in the medical arena. Evacuate the bladder before you go to bed. Don't drink anything within about 2 hours of going to bed. If there's distress in the family, then we recommend family counseling, of course, and maybe even child counseling, depending on the age of the child. Okay, so let's talk about psychological disorders. Psychological disorders in children have been overlooked for years, and fewer clinicians are being trained adequately to treat children. That requires special training, not easily available in graduate programs. Do we give antidepressants to children? I want to tell you that sometimes you have to. If the child is desperately depressed and or suicidal, you cannot wait for counseling to take effect. But in addition, counseling for very young children is not particularly useful because psychological disorders, while being successfully treated using therapies, are not as effective in the younger group because talk therapies don't work as well. You have play therapies, but not the same thing, is it? There are just some conditions that require medication, and we know they work well with adults. So antidepressants, though, we don't know the long-term effects on developing brains. We don't know the correct dosages, so we generally start very, very low. And child psychiatrists are not easy to find these days, particularly in rural areas. Stuttering is a very common issue, and I have a PowerPoint video embedded for you to look at, okay? And this video is a good one. It's very short, about a minute 10, with children who stutter talking about it. Stuttering is simply a substantial disruption in the rhythm and fluency of speech. It's the most common speech impairment. 1 in 5 children experience some period of stuttering, and we think it's a continuity issue within areas of the brain neurologically. It could be inherited. It can be induced too by brain injury and stroke and so on. It is made worse by stress in children that have it. It usually goes away as children age, and speech therapy does help quite a bit. In terms of ADHD, this stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It is not called ADD. A lot of people still call it that. It's not called that. This has a number of common symptoms: persistent difficulty in finishing tasks, following instructions, and organizing work. Frequently interrupting others or excessive talking. A tendency to jump from task to task before hearing all the instructions. A difficulty waiting and remaining seated, fidgeting, squirming, those kinds of things. These things have to be excessive beyond just curiosity or activity level, and have to be pervasive, and they have to occur in all places, not just in one place. So you need to get the feedback from school, home, work, and social settings, okay? Church, maybe. So this is not just normal distractibility or an overstressed lifestyle that's created by parents wanting children to do anything and everything and be occupied every night, every evening and afternoon of the week. That's not what this is. Do we medicate it? Well, only when it's absolutely necessary. The symptoms have to appear before the age of 7. We do not want to medicate before the age of 7 in general. And this has to be excessive, and other treatments have to have failed. Usually then we might consider an ADHD medication, okay? Let's talk about autism for a minute. This is becoming more and more prevalent in the population. Boy, I have an embedded video that's 8 minutes long of a woman who retained her ability to think clearly and type 120 words a minute with perfection, who then has a voice synthesizer that can tell you what's going on with her and her autism. It's very, very useful to watch this, so please do. It's on page 26, I think. Okay, so the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, edition 5, is the one that lists this as autism spectrum disorder. They removed Asperger's, which used to be a separate disorder. Asperger's is simply was thought of as a mild form, a more high functioning level of autism, and now they've simply included it. And I'll tell you that one of the reasons they included it as a spectrum and eliminated autism is that insurance wasn't providing for the treatment of anyone who was labeled as having Asperger's. They thought, well, we're not going to fund that, The insurance companies make money by denying services. They make a lot of money doing that. But pardon me for denigrating such a wonderful, wonderful industry. So autism spectrum disorder has some level, often major impairments in things like social skills and therefore relationships, communication, a kind of stereotypical behaviors that might occur where sometimes people rock and do this in severe forms of the disorder anyway, and a desire to keep everything consistent and orderly. They do the same things over and over. In a classroom, they may sit in the same exact chair every time and get somewhat unnerved, anxious, which is the right word, if that gets out of whack and they can't sit in that chair. It takes them a while to get moved to the new chair and feel okay. Anxiety is the thing I want you to remember most. People with autism almost invariably have lots of anxiety and may indeed have additional anxiety disorders, but they almost always have lots of anxiety. So please have some empathy for that. They don't always show that, or at least it's not noticed as easily with people who have autism. In 1970, only two to three people per 10,000 have had autism. Now it's it's 1 in 59 in 2018, and about 1 in 58 in 2020. 58 and a half, I believe now. Boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism as girls, and it's very difficult but possible to diagnose it before the age of about 2 or 3. We can now see it very early in some subtle ways. We can reliably diagnose it now between 2 and 3. Genetics plays a larger role than any other factor by correlation, anyway. And the co-occurrence in identical twins is between 40 and 80%. Means that it's not 100% genetic. There's got to be something in the environment triggering it or adding to the genetic vulnerabilities, right? Is it environmental pollutants? Is it, what is it? Airborne pollutants? Don't know. Now, what doesn't cause autism is immunizations. And let me say that again. Immunizations do not cause autism. Many, many, many really carefully, expertly done studies have shown that's not possible. Not happening. That original research was faked research by a British physician who was stripped of his license and the article removed, and the cat was out of the bag. By then, that was, I think, in the 90s, and so it's not true. Okay. Do you remember Piaget? Piaget's stages of cognitive development were the ones including the different ways of thinking, the ways of perceiving the world, and integrating that into a thinking pattern. And so the first one you'll remember is sensory motor, and then from about 2 to 6 is pre-operational. And now we have concrete operational. And concrete operational means that they're thinking more logically about the concrete events of the world. They grasp concrete analogies, and they can perform arithmetical operations, plus, minus, multiplication, and division, in that order, because those are in order of complexity, you might have noticed. Okay? And so the thought process is more logical, is a little more flexible and organized than it was in the previous age stage. So they can understand the physical world, okay, and they can understand then that matter cannot be created or destroyed just by changing its shape or its volume, changing its container in which a liquid was held, for example. And numbers of objects don't change because they're moved apart or repositioned. And there are many, 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 many substages of this, which I don't wish to go into, which would take quite a bit of time to do. But just understand that's the overall process. Okay? I have a really neat video embedded around 30 something, 34, 35. And this is the Piaget's conservation task, and it shows a number of interesting things that children who do not have concrete operations do. They're interesting things. Well, concrete operations also means that children can decenter and reverse, so they can focus on several problems at once. Okay, they can decenter off of one thing, and they can begin to construct the events that other people are viewing from their points of view, see? And in reversibility, they can go through a series of steps forward and then reverse it in the other direction, which means they can construct a chain of beads, for example, of different colors, and then they can copy the original pattern but do it in reverse, you see. That may not sound like much to you as an adult, but it's a big deal when you see this in a child. And they can do the arithmetic, but children still need concrete operation for the most part. Now, one thing that this concrete operations give rise to is called seriation. And seriation is the ability to arrange objects or things according to some dimension, such as weight or size, or maybe first baseman in a collection of baseball cards, or batting averages, or they love to arrange things by virtue of some aspect that they can determine with their senses. So, length of sticks from longest to shortest, doll clothing for this event versus that event, hats of dolls versus skirts of dolls, or some such things. Okay? And then in the next episode, we'll talk about social and personality development. See you in a minute.